The morning in Maplewood looked clean and staged, like a picture on a brochure. Lawns were clipped sharp, driveways shone, flags hung still. A breeze moved, but it felt like it had been told where to go. Then metal bit through metal and the quiet broke. A pair of red-handled bolt cutters closed around a heavy lock at the end of a short chain. The lock shivered once and gave up. It hit the concrete with a flat clatter that sounded like a bone tapped against a sink. She stood there for a second, the bolt cutters hanging at her side, the chain loose, the gate open. She wasn't sweating. She wasn't rushed. She had the calm of someone certain she could not be wrong. Her name was Karen Whitmore, board member of the HOA, keeper of rules written in neat ink and used like a blade. Her eyes had the bright, cold look of a person who thinks their hands are clean because the rules said yes. Across the street, a man saw it happen. Marcus had come home early from his night shift, the fabric of his shirt still holding the heat and grit of work. He found the scene the way you find a leak in a quiet house, sudden, wrong, and personal. The Jeep sat in its reserved space, black paint dull from a layer of dust that never seemed to wipe off completely, windows tinted dark, to keep out eyes and heat. It looked like a body at rest. It looked like a reminder. It wasn't just a car. It was a cover, a shield, a tool. And for him, it was a promise he had made and kept even when nobody saw. Neighbors felt the sound of the lock before they understood it. Curtains twitched, doors cracked. People stepped out in slippers, coffee cups in hand, phones tilted low. They watched with the eager quiet that always shows up for someone else's trouble. They knew Karen. They had seen her clip notices to front doors with a stapler she carried like a badge. Trash day violations, color swatches for porch paint, address numbers too small, grass too long, lawn chairs too bright. She liked rules that could be measured with a ruler and a glare. Marcus moved toward her, a steady walk that tried to keep his balance and his breath. He was tall, but never used it like a threat. He kept his hands loose at his sides the way you do when you know your body gets judged before your words. His face stayed calm, but everything in him pulled tight. He had been warned before. He had been noted, reminded, told about lines and fines and bylaws. Each letter felt like an old story with a new date. Karen did not step back. She reached for the driver's door and tested the handle. It was locked. She gave a hard look at the dark window like it had insulted her. The Jeep's mirrors held a warped reflection of her face, pale and rigid. She reached for the passenger side, tugged at that handle too. Locked. She didn't frown. She simply went to the back and began to work at the hitch lock on the small storage box mounted there. The same red cutters rose and fell. Tension, pressure, snap. She liked the sound. It was a sound that said she had been right all along. People whispered. Some said her name, some said his. Some gulped coffee and scanned the scene for the first spark that would make a clean story to share later. A woman with a stroller stopped at the corner and squinted. A man in a robe lifted a phone as if he were checking the weather and made sure the camera was on. Somewhere, a dog barked and then stopped, like even it knew to keep quiet and listen. Marcus reached the edge of the space and looked down at the broken lock. He had bought that lock himself for a reason nobody in this neighborhood had ever asked him about. If they had asked, he couldn't have told them the whole truth anyway. He could say the locksmith said it was solid. He could say he needed it for peace of mind. He could say it kept honest people honest. But the real reason had layers that did not fit into yard talk. The Jeep wasn't his on paper. It wasn't anyone's really, not in a way he could put on a neighborhood form. It belonged to a task force that didn't exist until you needed it. It moved in shadows, sat on corners, and exploded into motion when a name or a face matched. A target. Most days it looked like a silent truck in a safe neighborhood. That was the point. He took in the strip of dull concrete where the lock lay and felt the old wave rise, the one made of every time he had to prove that he lived where he lived, worked where he worked, belonged where he was standing. The wave was not water. It was heat. It was memory. It was the voice in the back of his head that told him to speak softly and move slowly and explain what did not need explaining. Karen stood tall like a cop in a movie, but her badge was a binder of rules and a set of emails with the subject lines, in all caps. She stepped to the front of the Jeep and set her hand on the hood as if to claim it. Neighbors leaned in, their silence folding around the scene. The sun climbed a little higher and put a sharp line along the edge of the hood. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, thin as a wire. He remembered the first email from her. It came after he moved in. It used the word reminder twice and community standards 5 times. It nudged, then it pressed. It talked about the parking policy. No oversized vehicles in view after 10 p.m., no dark tints beyond the code, no external storage boxes without pre-approval, no exceptions. He had read it with his jaw clenched and his eyes burning. He had written, back with the shortest words he could find, and said he would comply to the letter. He always did. He parked inside the line. He paid dues on time. He waved back when waved at. He kept his grass ready for photographs. Every move had the careful shape of someone who knows a stranger might be filming. There had been more emails. There were phone calls he did not answer because the voice on the line sounded like a test he could not pass. There was a meeting in Juan, the clubhouse that he attended in a clean shirt and steady breath, where he was told about perception and uniform appearance and pride. He had nodded. He had smiled. He had gone home and sat in the dark until the night folded him up like a blanket. And then there was this morning. The cutters. The lock on the ground. The hood claimed by a hand that did not own it. He told his heartbeat to lower itself. He told his jaw to unclench. He told his shoulders to drop. He told his eyes to soften, because eyes can be misunderstood and used against you. He thought of the word dignity, the way some people think of a prayer. Not softness, not surrender, control. A choice to meet force with steady breath. The neighbors were part of the picture now, small figures placed along the frame. The retired couple pretending this was a walk, the teen with a skateboard under one sneaker like a kickstand, the man, in the robe who had stopped pretending his phone wasn't recording. None of them stepped in. None of them left. They held their ground, and their silence like a crowd at a game waiting for the first foul. Marcus knew the Jeep was bait and shield, rolling office and quiet blade. He knew what lay under the back panel, a set of radio units, 2 burner phones, in a Velcro sleeve, a folded jacket marked only inside with a number, a field kit sealed in a gray case with tamper tape, and a short page of instructions that were never meant for a homeowner's eyes. He knew there was nothing illegal in the Jeep. He also knew there was everything sensitive in it. He knew the word compromised and what it could do to a case. He knew the word liability and how quickly people say it when something goes wrong. A second siren answered the first, a deeper note, closer. The dog barked again, then stopped again. Karen squeezed the door handle one more time and let it go. She looked satisfied, as if the broken lock was a trophy and the closed doors were a dare she had already won. She brushed her hands on her slacks. She checked the sky like a pilot before takeoff. She radiated the exact kind of certainty that had followed him since childhood, the certainty that rules can be shaped to fit a face. He thought of other mornings, a teacher who asked for ID when he walked into his own high school early for band practice, a mall cop who trailed him without words, a neighbor who reported a suspicious person when he jogged at dusk with a hoodie up against the cold. Every moment quiet. Every moment explained later by someone else. Every moment added up and stored in the body like a scar under the skin. He scanned the watching faces and found one, a boy near the curb with a backpack, hair messy, eyes sharp. The boy looked at Marcus, then at Karen, then at the lock on the ground. He understood something, but he did not have the words for it yet. Kids never do. They feel the tilt of the world before they can name it. Marcus felt a sudden, fierce need to set the tilt back by one small degree. A breath pulled through him. He measured the space between himself and the Jeep. He measured the weight of eyes. He measured the sound of those approaching sirens. He measured the fact that words spoken too fast could become a story he did not own. He had learned to hold words the way you hold a hot cup, carefully, with both hands. The wind moved again. Flags lifted and then fell. A delivery truck groaned on the far street and kept going. The morning hung there, waiting. The lock lay by the gate like a lost tooth. The chain drooped, useless, ugly. Everyone could see it. Not everyone could see what it had cut. He stepped forward, not fast, not slow, the way you step toward a cliff to look over. The crowd leaned with him, drawn by gravity. His eyes settled on the glove box he could not reach, and the jacket he could not show, and the badge number he would not say. The story in front of him had two paths, one where he let someone else write it, one where he held the pen with steady hands. He knew which one he wanted. Somewhere close now, a radio crackled. Tires whispered over asphalt. The sound wrapped the cul-de-sac like a warning. He kept his face calm, because calm was armor. He kept his hands visible, because visible was survival. He kept the word dignity high in his chest where it could hold him up. The morning waited for the first move. He could feel it leaning in. He could feel the change coming like air before rain. He knew that once the next sound came, nothing on this street would be the same again. The sirens grew louder, not rushing but circling, drawing near with a patient weight. Karen didn't flinch. She smoothed her blouse as though about to give a speech. The neighbors stood taller, adjusting their stances to look less like gawkers and more like witnesses. Marcus felt every second sharpen. He wasn't afraid of the police. He wore their shadows every day in another world, a world hidden from his neighbors. What he feared was the story being told for him before he could breathe a word. A squad car slid into the cul-de-sac, its tires crunching gravel at the curb. Blue lights spun silently, painting Karen's face with flashes that made her look carved from ice. Two officers stepped out. One was young, his vest still stiff, his jawline sharp with untested authority. The other was older, slower, with eyes dulled by routine. They saw Karen first. She waved, almost cheerful, like she had called them. "She's smiling," someone whispered from the sidewalk. Karen pointed at the Jeep. Violation. Repeated violation. Oversized, tinted, unauthorized. Dangerous. Her voice was crisp, every syllable rehearsed. She gestured at the broken lock like it was evidence against Marcus instead of against her. And he... She flicked her chin toward Marcus. "He thinks rules don't apply to him." The younger officer glanced at Marcus. The look lasted longer than needed, weighing him, sorting him, reducing him to shape and skin. The older officer squinted at the Jeep, then at Karen, then at the cutter still dangling at her side. "You cut his lock," Marcus said, voice low, steady. Karen's smile didn't fade. The HOA authorized action. He ignored warnings. Marcus let silence hold the space for a moment. He could feel the neighbor's eyes burning against his back. He wanted to say 100 things. About the emails. About the nights he had parked. Inside every line. About the cameras on his Jeep that recorded her at least twice before trying the handle. But he didn't unload it all. He chose one line sharp enough to pierce. "You touched government property." That made the young officer blink. The older one's mouth pressed tight. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Government property? Please. This is a private community. Don't make it sound bigger than it is." Marcus took a step forward, enough for the crowd to lean closer. "Bigger than it is? Lady, you just cut a lock off a federal task force vehicle." The words dropped like a stone in a still pond. The ripples moved outward fast, through the officers, through the neighbors, through Karen. The cutters in her hand suddenly looked heavier. Her smile cracked. "You're bluffing," she said. "You people always bluff." Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. His silence worked harder than shouting could. The older officer finally spoke. "Ma'am, can I see those cutters?" Karen bristled. "I don't need to hand over." "Ma'am." His tone cut sharper than the tool itself. She froze, then reluctantly passed them. The younger officer turned to Marcus. "You're telling us this vehicle belongs to a task force?" His voice trembled between skepticism and fear. Marcus held his gaze. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." The boy on the curb with the backpack whispered to his friend. "Task force?" Phones tilted higher, recording every second now. Karen let out a laugh, too loud, too forced. "Oh, come on, look at him, look at this circus. He's spinning stories because he got caught breaking HOA rules. And you're going to let him intimidate this neighborhood with fairy tales about government vehicles? No, not happening. Not here. Her words dripped poison. She pointed at Marcus like her finger was a dagger. The crowd stiffened, the air heavier now with the history they didn't want to name but all felt. Marcus's voice was soft, almost gentle. You just trespassed on federal property, broke into it, and tried to tamper with equipment inside. Do you know what they call that? Karen's throat tightened, but she covered it with another scoff. Drama. That's what they call it. The older officer shifted uncomfortably. He took a step toward the Jeep, leaned close to the window and caught sight of the government tag half hidden under the dash. His eyes widened, just slightly. Enough. He turned back slowly. Ma'am, I think you need to step back. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She searched his face for loyalty, for agreement, but found none. The crowd murmured now, the whispers turning into a low hum. Some people nodded at Marcus. Others simply stared, finally realizing the weight of the Jeep, the lock, the silence. Karen tried again, louder, desperate. This man doesn't belong here. This neighborhood has standards. Look at him. The younger officer cut her off. Ma'am, enough. The sound of those two words stunned the circle of onlookers. They weren't aimed at Marcus. They weren't aimed at the black man standing with dignity despite humiliation. They were aimed at her. Karen's face flushed red, her lips trembling. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply looked at her, his eyes steady, a mirror of everything she had tried to strip from him. The boy with the backpack spoke louder this time, voice cracking but sure. She cut the lock. I saw it. Others followed. Yeah, she did. She's been after him for months. She thinks she runs this street. Whispers had turned into statements. Statements turned into witnesses. The silence that had protected Karen so long was breaking, piece by piece. Karen's hands shook. She reached for her phone, pulling it out like a weapon. I'll call the board. I'll call the president. You'll see. This won't hold. But the officers didn't move for her. They stayed with Marcus, eyes darting between the Jeep and his steady frame. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his tone even but heavy. This isn't about a car. This isn't about paint colors or bylaws. This is about control. You thought cutting that lock made you bigger than me. All it did was show who you really are. The older officer's radio crackled, dispatch calling for confirmation. He stepped aside, answering in clipped words Marcus couldn't catch. The younger officer stood awkwardly, eyes shifting between Karen and the Jeep like he'd stepped into a play with no script. Karen's voice shrilled now, high-pitched and unraveling. You can't do this. I am protecting this neighborhood. People like him. She caught herself, but too late. The words hung there, ugly and naked. Gasps rose from the neighbors. Someone muttered, Did she just say that? Another hissed, Always knew. Phones captured everything. Marcus didn't move closer. He didn't need to. He let her choke on her own words. The sirens faded as another car pulled in. Unmarked, quiet, heavy. Two men stepped out, suits sharp, eyes colder than any HOA rulebook. They moved straight to Marcus, not Karen, and spoke in low voices meant only for him. The crowd strained to hear but couldn't. Karen's face drained of color. She realized these men weren't HOA board members. They weren't local police. They were bigger, heavier, untouchable. One of them turned just enough for the neighborhood to see a badge flash in the light. The whispers exploded again. Marcus finally spoke, but only to Karen. You thought you were cutting my lock. You were cutting your own rope. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The cutters were gone. The crowd was against her. And the Jeep, silent and black, stood untouchable. The unmarked men nodded once to Marcus. Then they looked at Karen with the kind of stare that strips away every ounce of borrowed power. She folded slightly like a flag in wind. The older officer cleared his throat, unsure what to do, waiting for instruction. The younger one lowered his eyes, ashamed. Neighbors stayed rooted, watching history shift in real time. No one moved to defend Karen. No one spoke for her. The silence she had wielded for years turned on her, and it was louder than any accusation. Marcus stood there, still, calm, his breath steady. He didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He let dignity do the work. And in that quiet, Karen realized her empire was made of paper. And today, someone finally lit the match. Karen's voice faltered as the silence turned against her. The neighbors' stares were sharp now, not curious but cutting, filled with judgment she could not rewrite. She had always counted on their silence, their compliance, their quiet nods when she declared what was acceptable. Now they looked at her the way people look at a broken sign that once told them where to go, but now lies twisted in the grass. The unmarked men stepped forward, their presence altering the air like a storm pushing in. They didn't need uniforms. Their stillness carried weight. One of them, tall with gray at his temples, fixed his eyes on Karen. She dropped her phone into her purse, fumbling with the zipper as though that would erase the moment. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice smooth but final. "You've interfered with restricted property." "That's a federal matter," Karen gasped, trying to summon the power that had always saved her before. "I'm an elected HOA officer. I represent this community. You can't—" He cut her off with a stare that silenced the street. "Your cutters didn't care about titles. Neither do I." The younger police officer shifted, looking at his partner for guidance. The older officer gave a small nod, confirming what they both understood. This had just risen above them. Their jurisdiction had shrunk. They were extras now, not leads. Marcus stood still, his hands relaxed but his eyes locked on Karen. He said nothing, and in his silence the weight of her actions swelled. He had learned long ago that words weren't always necessary. Sometimes letting the truth breathe was enough. The boy with the backpack spoke again, louder, bolder. "She always goes after him, always." His voice cracked, but it carried. Others followed, emboldened by the shift. "Yeah, she called the tow truck on his car last winter. She left letters on his door. She doesn't let him breathe." Whispers turned to testimony, each word stacking on the last like bricks, in a wall closing in around Karen. Her face flushed deep red, then pale, the swing of someone losing her grip on the narrative. She reached out as though to pull the crowd back to her side, but the crowd stepped away. Distance grew like a moat. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady, quiet enough to make them lean in. "You wanted to show power. You showed fear instead." Karen's lips trembled. "You think you can turn them against me? You think one moment erases years of order?" Marcus tilted his head, calm. "Not order. Control. There's a difference." The man with gray at his temples moved closer to Karen. His shadow swallowed hers. "We'll need a statement, now." She shook her head violently. "No, you can't treat me like this. I'm protecting property values. I'm protecting families." The crowd hissed. A woman with folded arms muttered, "Protecting herself. More like," another said. "She's been hiding behind rules. Now she's exposed." Karen looked around desperately for an ally, but even the faces she once commanded avoided her eyes. Phones recorded every twitch of her expression, every quiver of her voice. She was trapped in the very theater she had staged. Marcus's silence was heavier than any speech. He stood tall but not aggressive, calm but unyielding. That calmness cut deeper than rage ever could. He wasn't giving her the satisfaction of anger. He was showing her something worse: indifference to her power. The younger officer leaned toward his partner. "We taking her in?" The older one whispered back, but loud enough for Marcus to hear. "She's not walking away from this clean." Karen stamped her foot like a child denied candy. "You can't arrest me. This is harassment." The man with gray at his temples finally spoke again, flat and cold. "Harassment. That's a word you should know well." Her body sagged. For the first time, she seemed smaller, as though the air had been pulled out of her. The cutters were gone, the crowd was gone, the shield of silence gone. She stood exposed, trembling under the gaze of neighbors who now saw her without the armor of authority. Marcus remembered flashbacks he never wanted to recall. Times he had filed complaints, times he had written letters, times he had asked for help when lines were crossed. Each time the answer was silence. Each time his dignity was filed away as an inconvenience. He had swallowed it, kept working, kept breathing, knowing the world wasn't designed to hear him. But now, in this moment, every one of those silences cracked open like dry wood in fire. Karen tried one last time to salvage herself. She pointed at Marcus, her hand shaking. "He's lying. He doesn't belong here. He never belonged here." Marcus's reply was quiet, but it carried through every ear and every recording phone. "Funny. I've heard that before. Never from someone this small." The boy on the curb smiled faintly, repeating the line under his breath like a lesson learned. The crowd shifted, the power balance tilting for good. The man with gray nodded to his partner, and they stepped aside with Marcus, speaking low. "You handled this with restraint," one of them said. "That matters." Marcus simply nodded. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the weight of years pressing down, the truth that this was only one battle in a war fought daily in 1,000 quiet humiliations. Still, this one mattered. Karen sagged onto the curb, her voice breaking. "This can't be happening. I was right. I was protecting us." But no one answered her. The silence she had wielded against Marcus now wrapped around her like chains. The neighbors turned away, muttering, shaking their heads, recording the collapse of the woman who had ruled their lawns with iron letters and late-night complaints. The older officer finally moved, approaching Karen with caution. "Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us." Her eyes widened, wild. "No, you can't. I'm not the criminal here. He is." She pointed again, but her finger trembled too much to steady. Marcus didn't move. He simply watched, his face unreadable. He had no need to argue. Her unraveling was her own doing. The crowd parted as Karen was led toward the squad car. Phones followed her like vultures. Her cries grew shrill, words spilling without coherence. "This is wrong. This is wrong. I built this place. I made it safe." No one echoed her. No one defended her. The boy with the backpack recorded the whole walk, eyes wide, knowing he was capturing history for the neighborhood to replay over and over. Marcus turned back to the Jeep. The broken lock still lay on the ground. He bent slowly, picked it up, and held it in his palm. It felt lighter now, almost hollow, but he knew its weight wasn't gone. The memory of its snap would stay. The unmarked men stood beside him. One said quietly, "This will go higher. Be ready." Marcus nodded again, his jaw tight. "I've been ready my whole life." They looked at him, measuring the truth in his words, and gave a small nod of respect. Then they moved back toward their car, leaving him in the center of the cul-de-sac, a figure alone but unbroken. Neighbors began to drift back to their houses, their whispers filling the air like falling leaves. Some looked at Marcus with newfound respect, others with unease, but none with the dismissal they once carried. Something had shifted. Karen's shouts faded as the squad car rolled away, her figure shrinking in the back seat. The boy with the backpack lowered his phone, his eyes locked on Marcus. "She thought she owned everything," he said softly. Marcus finally looked at him. His voice was calm, steady, carrying weight. "Nobody owns dignity. You carry it yourself." The boy nodded, holding on to the words. The Jeep stood silent, its secrets untouched, its presence now heavier than ever in the neighborhood's memory. Marcus knew the battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning of the reckoning, and as the last of the neighbors slipped back inside, the cul-de-sac returned to its strange, brittle quiet. Only this time, the silence belonged to him. The night dropped heavy on Maplewood, but the day's fire lingered in whispers. Screens glowed inside houses as neighbors replayed the videos they had taken. Karen's voice, shrill and brittle, echoed again and again, paired with Marcus's steady silence. Clips traveled fast, leaving the cul-de-sac and spilling into feeds across the city. Some typed furious comments, others shared quietly, letting the images speak for them. By morning, the story wasn't just a neighborhood scandal. It was a headline. Marcus sat alone on his porch, his body still, his eyes locked on the Jeep. The broken lock rested on the table beside him like an artifact of war. He hadn't slept. He wasn't tired. He was waiting. He knew the storm wasn't over. It had just changed shape. His phone buzzed endlessly, messages from coworkers, from old friends, even from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Saw the video. That was you, right? Stay strong, man. They exposed her good. Careful, though. They'll protect her before they protect you. He read them all, replied to none. Inside his head, other voices rose. Older ones, memories he tried to bury. His father sitting on the porch of their childhood home shaking his head. Son, you'll be guilty before you even speak. That's the law of faces like ours. A teacher telling him he was too loud when he simply asked for fairness. A landlord who said wrong neighborhood when he tried to rent closer to work. Every silence he swallowed, every injustice he carried. Tonight they pressed down harder, demanding to be acknowledged. A car slowed outside. Marcus's eyes narrowed, the unmarked sedan again. The two men stepped out, shadows moving in lamplight. Their suits looked sharper under the night sky, their eyes colder. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They simply stepped onto the porch and waited. You're trending, the gray-templed one said. Marcus didn't answer. The other man smirked slightly. That video? It's everywhere. She's finished. Marcus looked at them both, his voice steady. Finished or protected? You know how this works. They'll try to bury it. They'll paint me as the aggressor. The gray-templed man nodded slowly. That's why you'll need to testify. This won't just vanish. Not anymore. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't like the spotlight. Never wanted it. His work thrived in shadows, where names weren't spoken and actions weren't filmed. But this wasn't about choice. The Jeep wasn't just his cover anymore. It was evidence. And Karen had cut into more than metal. She had cut into the truth. The younger man leaned closer. The task force is behind you, but you need to hold steady. They'll come at you sideways. Her lawyers, the HOA board, the city council. They'll drag your name, your record, your face. Be ready. Marcus let the words sink. He had been ready his whole life, but readiness never made the blows softer. Still, he nodded once. I'll stand. They exchanged looks, satisfied. Then they left as quietly as they came, their car slipping into the dark like a blade into its sheath. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the night air pressing against him. Somewhere in the distance he heard fireworks. Too early, too out of season. Maybe kids, maybe celebration. But to him, it sounded like warning shots. The morning came with headlines. Local news anchors with practiced concern replayed the video. Karen cutting the lock, Karen yelling about standards, Karen pointing and unraveling. The clip of Marcus's calm line, "You thought you were cutting my lock, you were cutting your own rope," played on repeat. Commentators called it the quote of the year. Hashtag spread. Hokerin. Cut her own rope. Dignity doesn't break. Karen's allies scrambled. The HOA board released a statement. We do not condone the actions of Ms. Whitmore. The HOA respects all residents equally. The words rang hollow. Neighbors remembered every letter Karen had stapled to their doors. The silence of years now looked like complicity. Reporters showed up on Maplewood sidewalks, knocking on doors, fishing for comments. Some neighbors hid, others spoke freely. She always targeted him, one said, face blurred on camera. We saw it, but we didn't say anything. Now, I guess we can't ignore it anymore. Marcus kept to his porch, speaking to no one. Cameras pointed his way, but he stayed silent. He knew the power of stillness. He knew that sometimes silence was the sharpest answer. Karen, meanwhile, hid inside her house. But not for long. Soon, she was on television, her hair neat, her voice carefully coached. I was enforcing community rules, she told the interviewer. This isn't about race, this is about order. The interviewer raised an eyebrow. But why cut the lock? Why not follow due process? Karen smiled tightly. Because due process had failed. Someone had to act. I acted. Clips of her. Shrill breakdown on the street played side by side with her calm studio voice. The contrast was brutal. The internet shredded her, memes flooding every feed. One showed her face next to a broken lock with the caption, "Some locks keep us safe. Some expose the truth." Another repeated Marcus's words in bold letters. "You were cutting your own rope." The courthouse loomed closer with every passing day. Marcus was subpoenaed. His presence demanded. He ironed his shirt carefully, his hands steady even as his chest carried weight. He thought of his father again. Dignity, son. Even when they strip everything else, hold that. The night before the hearing, the neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. The boy with the backpack knocked on Marcus's door timidly. "Hey," he said, eyes wide. "My mom said you're gonna be in court tomorrow. I wanted to say." She was wrong. Everyone knows it now. Even me. Marcus crouched, slightly to meet his gaze. The truth doesn't need everyone to shout it. Sometimes just one person saying it is enough. The boy nodded, clutching his straps. "I'll remember that." Marcus smiled faintly. "Good. Carry it with you. That's your lock. Don't let anyone cut it." The boy grinned and left, his steps lighter than before. Marcus closed the door, the weight still there but tempered by something rare. Hope. For once, silence wasn't his cage. It was his weapon. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, the silence would finally shift from him to her. When dawn broke, the air felt different. Not lighter, but charged. Like a storm about to break. Marcus dressed slowly, carefully, each button a piece of armor. He glanced at the Jeep one last time before leaving. It stood steady, its secrets intact, its presence now legendary. As he stepped into the waiting car that would take him downtown, Marcus carried no anger, no fear, only resolve. The rope Karen had cut was hers, not his. And tomorrow, the world would see it snap. The courthouse steps rose like stone teeth biting into the sky. Reporters lined the sidewalk, their cameras perched on shoulders, microphones outstretched like spears. Voices called Marcus's name, but he didn't answer. He walked steady, the same way he had walked across that cul-de-sac when Karen broke the lock. His shoulders were squared, his chin level, his silence thicker than the noise around him. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with the smell of polished wood and paper. The courtroom was already half full, citizens packed into benches, journalists tapping at keyboards, neighbors curious enough to skip work for a front-row view. Karen sat at the defense table, her hair pulled tight, her blouse cream white, as if a fresh coat of paint could erase cracks in the wall. Her eyes darted toward Marcus as he entered, but he didn't look at her. He looked at the judge's bench, high and commanding, where the truth would finally be spoken. The bailiff called for order, his voice echoing off the walls. Karen's lawyer, a man slick in both hair and manner, rose first. He painted her as misunderstood, a protector of community standards, a woman overwhelmed by responsibility. She acted not out of malice, he said, but out of duty. She believed she was maintaining order. And though her methods may have been misguided, her intentions were pure. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Whispers rippled. Pure intentions had been the excuse for centuries of broken locks, stolen dignity, stripped voices. Marcus sat still, his hands folded in his lap, listening without reaction. He had heard this song before. Different instruments, same melody. Then it was time. The prosecutor called Marcus to the stand. He rose, his steps slow but firm. Every eye in the room followed him, recording his movement as though each step carried history itself. He took the oath with a steady voice, sat, and faced the room. "State your name for the record." Marcus Reed. "And your occupation?" Marcus hesitated a beat, then answered, "I work with a federal task force." Gasps swept through the benches. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, signaling the weight of the words. The prosecutor nodded. "Tell us what happened that morning." Marcus's Voice was calm, deliberate. I came home early from my shift. I saw Ms. Whitmore cutting the lock I had placed on the gate protecting my vehicle. She used bolt cutters. She entered without permission. When I confronted her, she said, and I quote, "You don't belong here." The words landed like stones. Karen flinched, her face twisting as though the memory itself cut deeper than the lock she had snapped. Phones buzzed silently in pockets. Reporters typed faster. The prosecutor stepped back. "Did you give Ms. Whitmore permission to cut that lock?" "No." "Was that vehicle in violation of any law?" "No, it was in compliance." "Was that vehicle personal property?" Marcus paused. His eyes swept the courtroom, then returned to the prosecutor. "No, it was government property." The ripple this time was louder. The judge banged the gavel. "Order. Karen's lawyer." "Shut up." "Objection, relevance." The prosecutor turned, voice sharp. "Relevance? Your client broke into a federal vehicle. That's not relevance, that's reality." The objection was overruled. The weight settled back into the room. Marcus stayed still, calm as stone. Karen's lawyer stepped forward, circling like a wolf. "Mr. Reed, isn't it true that Ms. Whitmore had sent you numerous notices regarding violations, that you ignored them?" Marcus's gaze held steady. "I followed every bylaw, every letter, every rule." The lawyer smirked. "Every rule? And yet somehow Ms. Whitmore felt compelled to act. Could it be that your vehicle's appearance intimidated her?" The word hung there, dripping with implication. The courtroom stiffened. Marcus leaned slightly forward. "Intimidated?" His voice was low, cutting. "My vehicle didn't intimidate her. My existence did." Gasps again. The judge didn't. Bang the gavel this time. She let the silence expand, because sometimes silence told the truth better than noise. The lawyer faltered, stammering for his next line. "So, you claim this is about race?" Marcus didn't blink. "I don't claim it. She said it. When she pointed at me and shouted that I didn't belong here. That was her truth, not mine." Karen squirmed in her seat, her knuckles white against the table. The lawyer tried to recover, but the words slipped through his fingers like water. "So you expect this court to believe that a respected HOA officer," "Respect," Marcus interrupted softly, "isn't the same as justice. Ask the people she fined for flower pots the wrong shade of blue. Ask the families she threatened for parking too long in visitor spaces. Respect can be fear. Justice is different." The crowd stirred, murmurs rising again. Even the judge's eyes softened slightly, her gavel unused. The prosecutor returned, his voice crisp. "Mr. Reed, how did you respond when Ms. Whitmore confronted you?" Marcus looked at Karen, then back to the prosecutor. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move toward her. I spoke the truth, that she had tampered with a government vehicle, and that in cutting my lock, she was cutting her own rope." The line echoed again, filling the chamber with a weight that settled on every shoulder. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some in the gallery nodded slowly. Karen's face twisted, the words replaying in her head like a curse. The prosecutor stepped back. "No further questions." Karen's lawyer tried again, desperate, sweating now. "Mr. Reed, surely you understand Ms. Whitmore believed she was protecting her community. Is that so wrong?" Marcus's reply was calm, almost tender. "Protecting a community means lifting it up, not choking it with chains. She didn't protect anyone. She protected her own fear." The lawyer froze. He had no answer. He mumbled, "No more questions," and sank into his chair. Marcus was dismissed, stepping down with the same quiet dignity he had carried in. He didn't look at Karen as he passed. He didn't need to. She was unraveling on her own. The judge called for recess. The courtroom buzzed, voices colliding, reporters rushing out to beam the story live. Marcus sat on a bench outside, breathing slow, steady. He knew the battle wasn't finished. But for the first time, the silence wasn't his burden. It was hers. Karen remained inside, her lawyer whispering furiously. Her hands shook. She glanced around the emptying room, desperate for one sympathetic face. There were none. The silence she had once used to dominate was now the silence that condemned her. When court resumed, the prosecutor played the neighborhood videos. The screen showed her cutting the lock, shouting, her words sharp and undeniable. "You don't belong here." Her face, twisted in rage, filled the courtroom. Karen buried her head in her hands. The crowd watched in silence. The judge's eyes were cold, steady. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He sat still, knowing that the truth was unfolding without him lifting a finger. When the video ended, the prosecutor spoke one last line. "Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, you don't need a speech. You just need to listen." The courtroom hung heavy in silence, and in that silence, Karen's empire crumbled. The courtroom sat heavy in the pause after the video ended. It was as though the walls themselves refused to echo Karen's words, leaving them to hang, exposed and ugly, in the stale air. She shifted in her seat, her face blotched with red, her eyes darting anywhere but toward Marcus. She looked at the ceiling, at the floor, at her own trembling hands, but never at him. The judge leaned forward slightly, folding her hands. Her voice was level, unhurried, yet sharp enough to slice through the tension. "Ms. Whitmore, the evidence speaks clearly, but you will have your chance. Your attorney may call you." Karen's lawyer stood, his tie slightly loosened now, his forehead damp. He adjusted his papers, shuffled them though he knew order would not save him. Finally, he looked at her. "Ms. Whitmore, please take the stand." She rose stiffly, as though every step dragged chains. The murmurs from the gallery buzzed like static. She adjusted her blouse, smoothed her skirt, and tried to lift her chin, but it trembled anyway. She swore the oath with a cracked voice, then sat, gripping the edge of the chair like it might keep her from drowning. The lawyer leaned in, gentle at first. "Ms. Whitmore, could you tell the court, in your own words, why you felt compelled to act that morning?" Her voice wavered, then steadied. "Because no one else would. Because rules matter. Because when rules break down, so does safety. I've spent years protecting that neighborhood. People depend on me. They count on me to keep things orderly." He nodded. "And when you saw the Jeep, what did you feel?" She hesitated. "Fear," she said finally. "It was large, dark, intimidating, and it stayed too long. It didn't fit. It didn't belong." The room stirred. Sharp breaths pulled in, heads shaking. Her own lawyer winced but didn't stop her. Karen leaned forward, words spilling faster now. "I warned him. I sent notices. I tried the proper way. Nothing changed, so I acted. I had to. Otherwise, what message would that send? That anyone can just invade our space?" The prosecutor rose slowly. "Invade?" His voice was soft, but the single word echoed. "Explain, Ms. Whitmore. Who invaded?" She blinked, caught. The vehicle. Not the man." Silence. She fumbled. He brought it. And him? Did he belong? Her throat clicked as she swallowed. The gallery leaned forward, waiting. She glanced at Marcus, but his gaze was steady, unblinking. She looked away. I didn't think so." The prosecutor's voice sharpened. "Didn't think so. Not because of rules. Because of who he is." Karen's voice pitched high. "That's not true." The prosecutor turned to the jury. "But you heard her. Her own words. It didn't belong. He didn't belong. This was never about a vehicle. This was about prejudice dressed in policy." Karen's lawyer objected weakly, but the judge overruled. The silence afterward was brutal. Karen tried to regain footing. "I was doing my duty." Marcus's voice cut across the room, calm and low, though he wasn't on the stand. "Your duty was fear." The judge didn't stop him. She let the words land. Karen flinched as though slapped. The prosecutor pressed forward. "Ms. Whitmore, you cut into federal property. You shouted words that demeaned a man who followed every rule you waived. Do you understand the gravity of what you did?" Karen's lip trembled. I just wanted order. Order at the cost of justice? The prosecutor asked. Her voice broke. I didn't mean... But the video replayed in every mind, her face twisted, her words cutting. Intentions no longer mattered. The evidence lived beyond her. The judge leaned forward again, her eyes steel. Ms. Whitmore, order does not mean dominance. It means fairness. And fairness died under your bolt cutters. Karen sagged, her strength draining. She glanced around for support, but the neighbors who once stayed silent now looked at her with unveiled contempt. The boy with the backpack sat in the gallery beside his mother, his eyes wide and unblinking. Karen saw his stare and broke. Her lawyer tried to close quickly, painting her as misguided but not malicious. The prosecutor countered with precision. The lock, the words, the intent, the collapse of truth under bias. When arguments ended, the jury filed out. The room exhaled, tension breaking into hushed whispers. Marcus sat still, hands folded, eyes lowered. He knew the verdict was beyond his control. His dignity was his only shield, and he clung to it with iron grip. Time stretched. Minutes dragged, like hours. Finally, the jury returned, faces solemn, heavy with responsibility. The foreperson stood, voice clear. On the charge of destruction of government property, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of harassment, guilty. On the charge of trespassing, guilty. The words hit like stones rolling down a hill, unstoppable, crushing. Karen's knees buckled. She sank into her chair, her hands trembling, her mouth open in disbelief. She whispered, barely audible, "No, no, this isn't me." The judge's gavel struck. Order. She stared down at Karen, then at Marcus. Justice requires balance. Today the scales tip. The room erupted in murmurs, some relieved, some shocked. Reporters flew to the doors, their fingers typing, furiously. Hashtags were already waiting. Karen covered her face, but the cameras still caught her collapse. The woman who had ruled with silence was now drowned by it. Marcus didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He stood slowly, breathing deep, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned the room, settling briefly on the boy with the backpack. The boy gave a small nod, a silent recognition. Marcus returned it, subtle, enough. Outside, the crowd waited. Reporters thrust microphones forward, shouting questions. Mr. Reed, how do you feel? What does this verdict mean? Do you think justice was served? Marcus paused on the courthouse steps. The cameras aimed at him, the world holding its breath for a soundbite. He spoke only one sentence. Dignity isn't given, it's carried. Then he walked past the flashing lights, past the noise, past the chaos. He walked into the air of a world that for once, if only briefly, had tilted back toward balance. Karen was led out another door, shielded by deputies, her head low. The crowd jeered. She didn't look up. Her rope had snapped and there was no one left to hold her. Marcus climbed into the waiting car. The Jeep remained at home, silent, intact, its secrets untouched. The city around him buzzed with the story, but he leaned back, closing his eyes. He wasn't finished. He knew the struggle never ended with one verdict. But for now, the silence didn't hurt. For now, the silence was his. And in that quiet, Marcus let himself breathe. The city did not sleep on the verdict. That night, screens glowed in living rooms and cafes, replaying the moment Karen's knees buckled, replaying Marcus's quiet line on the courthouse steps. Social media turned his words into banners, into captions, into chants. Dignity isn't given, it's carried. The phrase spread like fire. Protesters painted it on cardboard signs. Students scrawled it in notebooks. Journalists quoted it in headlines. Marcus's calm had become a movement's roar. But in Maplewood, the echoes were quieter, heavier. Neighbors whispered behind curtains, ashamed at their own silence. Some avoided Marcus entirely, crossing the street rather than face him. Others offered awkward nods, fumbling greetings they never gave before. And some knocked at his door, apologies clumsy but earnest. One evening, the retired couple from 3 houses down came with a pie. The husband stammered, We should have spoken sooner. We saw her target you. We just didn't want trouble." His wife's eyes watered. "You carried what we should have carried with you, I'm sorry." Marcus accepted the pie, his voice even. "Silence is a choice. You chose comfort. I chose survival." They looked at the ground, shame thick in the air. Marcus let them go without more words. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't forgiving what could not be undone. Karen, meanwhile, unraveled. In public. News crews followed her car from the courthouse. She ducked cameras, her hands hiding her face, but the lenses caught every tremor, every crack. Old stories surfaced. Neighbors from her past neighborhood spoke of letters, fines, harassment. Former board members whispered about her obsession with rules, her hunger for control. Her empire of order collapsed into rubble of reputation. In interviews, she tried to rebuild. "I was misunderstood," she said once, her voice breaking. "I was trying to protect property values." But the clips of her screaming, "You don't belong here," drowned her excuses. The internet had already sentenced her. Marcus didn't gloat. He stayed home, kept his routines, worked his shifts. The Jeep remained in its space, quiet and steady. But everywhere he went, eyes followed him. At the grocery store, someone whispered, "That's him." At the gas station, a man clapped his shoulder saying, "You stood tall, brother." Even strangers sent letters to his mailbox. "Thank you for showing dignity. My son watched your video. He asked me questions I never knew how to answer. You gave me words." He read them in silence, setting them in a stack inside his drawer. Gratitude felt strange, heavy. He hadn't asked to be anyone's example. He had only wanted peace. But peace, he realized, rarely came quietly. The HOA board held an emergency meeting. The clubhouse filled with muttering residents. The board chair, sweating under the pressure, announced, "Ms. Whitmore has been removed from her position, effective immediately. We will review all enforcement practices moving forward." A woman in the back called out, "You let her do this for years. Why now?" Silence spread like wildfire. The board chair stammered, We had no proof before." The room hissed, with discontent. Neighbors who once feared Karen now vented openly, their stories piling into a mountain of grievance. The board shrank under the weight of collective memory. Marcus sat quietly in the back row, arms crossed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The tide had turned, and the board now scrambled in waters it once controlled. After the meeting, a group of younger neighbors approached him. One, a woman with braids and fierce eyes, said, "You showed us what silence does. We won't be silent anymore." Another added, "We're starting a petition, new bylaws, more transparency, more accountability." Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Don't just write rules, live them." The woman smiled faintly. "We will, because of you." At home that night, Marcus sat on his porch, the broken lock still on the table. He turned it in his hand, feeling the weight of what had cracked open. His phone buzzed, this time a call. He hesitated, then answered. "Reed." It was the gray-templed man. "The department owes you. You handled yourself with restraint when most wouldn't have. That mattered." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Restraint's the only weapon I'm allowed to carry in public." The man paused, then said, "Public eyes are on us now. On you. That can be dangerous, but it can also be powerful." Marcus closed his eyes, the words pressing heavy. "Power isn't what I want." "Maybe not," the man replied. "But dignity, that's yours, and people see it." The call ended. Marcus stared at the lock in his hand, its metal edges worn from the cutter's bite. It wasn't just a lock anymore. It was proof. Of violation, of injustice, of survival. He set it back down, carefully, as though it were sacred. Days passed, news cycles shifted, but the story lingered in corners, in whispers. Karen vanished from Maplewood, her house sold quickly, her name cursed quietly by those who once feared her. Rumors said she moved out of state. Others said she hid in shame with family. Marcus didn't care. Her absence was enough. The boy with the backpack still came by sometimes. He'd sit on the porch steps, fiddling with his phone. My teacher showed the video in class, he said once. We talked about justice, about racism. Some kids didn't believe it still happens, but I told them I saw it. I was there. Marcus looked at him, his voice low. Never let anyone tell you not to believe your own eyes. That's how truth dies. The boy nodded, quiet but resolute. One evening, the neighborhood was still when a woman Marcus had never met knocked on his door. She introduced herself softly. My name's Rosa. My parents lived here years ago. Karen pushed them out. Fines, threats, meetings. They couldn't fight her. They left. Marcus listened, her voice shaking as she spoke. They always said, one day someone would stand against her. Someone would make her face what she did. Thank you for being that someone. Marcus shook his head gently. I didn't stand for them. I stood for myself. But if it gave others strength, then I'm glad. Her eyes glistened. It did. When she left, the street was silent again. But it was a new silence. Not the silence of fear. The silence of change waiting to grow. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the night air cool, the Jeep gleaming faintly under the porch light. He thought of the rope Karen had cut. He thought of how it had looped back to her. He thought of the boy, the neighbors, the letters, the apologies. For the first time in years, the silence felt less like a cage and more like a shield. And as the crickets sang and the world beyond Maplewood buzzed with its endless noise, Marcus whispered to himself, not for cameras, not for neighbors, not for history, just for him. I carried it. I still do. Marcus woke to the sound of voices outside his window. Not angry voices, not the jeering he had grown used to over years, but low conversations, respectful, careful. He stepped onto his porch and saw neighbors gathered at the end of the cul-de-sac, their bodies angled inward, heads bent like they were planning something. When they noticed him, the talking stopped. A woman waved him over. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes cautious. The group parted just enough to let him in. The woman spoke first, her tone measured. We've been meeting, without the board, without Karen. We think it's time to rebuild the HOA into something better. Fairer. Another man, older, cleared his throat. We watched her tear at people for years. We let it happen. But now, the silence is gone. We want change. Marcus studied their faces. Some sincere, some nervous, some defensive. He asked the only question that mattered. Why now? The silence stretched before someone answered. The man muttered, because she got caught. Because you stood up when we didn't. Because we're ashamed. Marcus let the words hang. Then he said, calm and sharp, shame is easy. Responsibility is harder. Which one are you choosing? The woman nodded slowly. Understanding. Responsibility. We'll prove it. That night they drafted new bylaws. They included limits on board power, transparency and enforcement, and a grievance process that couldn't be ignored. The neighbors argued, debated, fought over wording. Marcus sat in the corner, listening more than speaking. When asked for input, he gave short lines that cut through noise. Don't write rules for control, write them for dignity. They wrote it down like scripture. Meanwhile, Karen's world collapsed further. News stations reported she had been stripped of her license to serve on any board. Civil suits stacked against her. Families she had harassed for years filed claims, armed with her own letters as evidence. Her lawyer resigned, unable to salvage her image. Her name trended online daily, no longer in sympathy, but as a punchline. Memes painted her face beside broken chains, captions mocking her downfall. Karen herself refused interviews now. She barricaded in a relative's house across town, blinds drawn, phone off. But still, reporters circled. She became a ghost of her own making, a warning in the flesh. Marcus didn't chase her story. He didn't need to. The world had already judged her. He focused instead on his own corner, where the Jeep sat untouched, where neighbors now waved not out of politeness, but out of recognition. The shift was small, but it mattered. One afternoon, the boy with the backpack appeared again, this time with a group of friends. They stood awkwardly in Marcus's yard, shifting from foot to foot. The boy spoke first. "Our teacher asked us to write essays about what justice looks like. I wrote about you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "About me?" The boy nodded. "I said justice is when someone stays calm even when the world's against them, and people finally see the truth." Friends nodded, murmuring agreement. One added, "We used your line in class about dignity. The teacher wrote it on the board." Marcus exhaled, heavy but not unkind. "Justice isn't about me. It's about making sure no one else has to carry what I did. You understand that?" The boy nodded again, his voice firm. "We do. We're gonna carry it too." Marcus felt something stir, reluctant hope. Then maybe it was worth it. The kids left, laughing softly, their voices light against the heavy history. Marcus watched them go, the corners of his mouth curving faintly. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. Fewer complaints, more conversations. People who never spoke before now met on sidewalks, not to gossip, but to listen. The HOA board, stripped down and rebuilt, invited Marcus to attend meetings. He declined at first, preferring his porch. But eventually he walked into the clubhouse, not as a defendant, not as a target, but as a voice they couldn't ignore. At one meeting, a man asked nervously, "Do you think we can ever erase what happened?" Marcus shook his head. "Erase? No, and you shouldn't want to. The scar is the proof. Live with it. Learn from it." The room nodded, subdued but accepting. Karen's name faded slowly, like smoke after fire. New headlines replaced hers, but in Maplewood, her memory lingered as a shadow. No one forgot, and no one dared step into her role. Her fall had carved a warning in stone. Silence will not protect you when the truth comes. Marcus, meanwhile, carried on. He still worked nights, still parked the Jeep carefully, still kept his hands loose and his eyes calm when strangers looked too long. But the weight had shifted. Where once he felt alone, now he felt watched in another way. Watched with respect, with quiet acknowledgement. Not enough to erase centuries, but enough to make this block different. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the houses, Marcus sat with the lock again. The boy with the backpack approached, this time alone. He sat beside Marcus, eyes fixed on the metal piece. "Why keep it?" he asked. Marcus turned it slowly in his hand. "Because broken things remind us. They tell us what not to repeat." The boy frowned. "But it hurt you." "Yes," Marcus said softly. "And it freed me." The boy thought about that, his young face serious. Then he whispered, "I want to be like you." Marcus looked at him steady. "Don't be like me. Be better. Carry the dignity sooner. Don't wait until they break your lock." The boy nodded, determination lighting his eyes. As night settled, Marcus leaned back in his chair. The crickets sang, the air cooler, calmer. The neighborhood around him breathed differently now. Not perfect, not healed, but changed. He closed his eyes, whispering words only for himself, words the world had already heard but needed repeating. Dignity isn't given. It's carried. This time, he didn't feel the weight alone. Karen's name was no longer on lips, but it lingered in the air like dust that refuses to settle. The neighborhood had moved on, yet every painted curb, every neatly trimmed lawn bore faint traces of her obsession. For Marcus, her absence wasn't victory. It was proof that silence can collapse a tyrant once people stop feeding it. But he also knew she wouldn't vanish so quietly. Some people cannot. Rumors trickled back. She had appealed her conviction, filed complaints against the prosecutor, claimed the jury was biased. Each attempt was rejected, her filings dismissed, with cold efficiency. Every door she tried to push through slammed back in her face. Marcus didn't follow the details. He didn't need to. Her collapse was inevitable. The rope already snapped. He stayed focused on his work, his Jeep, his quiet routines. But one evening, as he returned from shift, he found an envelope on his porch. No stamp, no name, just his own written across the front in a shaky hand. He carried it inside, sat at his table, and opened it. The paper inside was creased, stained, faintly with what might have been tears. The handwriting was uneven. "Marcus," it began. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this. But I need to write it. I thought I was protecting something. I thought I was right. The truth is I was protecting myself from fears I never admitted, from ugliness I carried. I see now what I did to you, to others. Maybe I always knew. Maybe I just didn't care until it swallowed me whole. You said I cut my own rope. You were right, and now I'm at the end of it. I don't know how to climb back. I don't know if I deserve to. I just needed you to know I hear it now." K. Marcus folded the letter slowly, setting it on the table beside the broken lock. He stared at both for a long time. Two pieces of metal, one cut by her hands, one written by her guilt, both proof of collapse. He didn't respond. He wouldn't. Some words didn't deserve reply. Silence, once his burden, was now his answer. Days passed, then weeks. The community changed in small, stubborn ways. Neighbors spoke more. The board posted notices less. The boy with the backpack, whose name Marcus finally learned was Devin, visited often, bringing questions. Why do people hate what they don't know? Why do rules feel like weapons sometimes? How do you stay calm when you want to shout? Marcus answered as best he could. Never long speeches, always steady lines. Fear is lazy. It makes people choose hate instead of work. Rules aren't bad. People who twist them are. Shouting feels good for a moment. Silence lasts longer. Devin soaked every word, his young mind carrying them like seeds. One evening, Devin asked, "Do you think Karen will ever change?" Marcus paused. The cicadas hummed in the trees, the air thick with summer. Change? He shook his head slightly. Maybe she'll regret, maybe she'll cry, but real change? That takes courage, and courage was never hers. Devin nodded, eyes wide, storing the lesson. News reached them weeks later. Karen had left the state. Bankrupt, disgraced, her appeals denied, her name now a cautionary tale in every HOA workshop, every legal seminar. Videos of her breakdown were used in trainings about bias and abuse of power. She had become education, unwillingly. Her empire of order reduced to a slideshow warning others what not to do. The neighbors of Maplewood gathered again, this time not for crisis but for celebration. A block party spread across the street, tables of food, children running free, music playing soft but steady. Marcus attended, standing on the edges, hands in pockets. People greeted him warmly, not with the hollow politeness of before, but with genuine nods, eyes that met his without flinching. The board chair raised a glass, clearing his throat. We owe a debt to Marcus. He carried what we didn't. He showed us dignity when we showed him silence. Marcus shook his head. I don't want thanks. I want change. Live it. Prove it. That's all. The crowd nodded, chastened but inspired. Later, as the night quieted and lanterns swung gently in the breeze, Marcus sat alone on his porch, watching laughter drift across the cul-de-sac. He thought of his father's words, the ones that had carried him all these years. Dignity, son. Even when they strip everything else, hold that. He had held it. And now the community held pieces of it too. Devin approached, a notebook in his hand. I wrote something, he said nervously. He read aloud, voice trembling but clear. Justice is when truth is louder than lies. Dignity is when silence is stronger than shouting. And courage is when someone carries both without breaking. Marcus listened, his eyes steady, his chest tight. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. That's good. That's strong. Carry it. Devin beamed. As the night deepened, Marcus looked at the broken lock on the table beside him, next to Karen's letter. He thought of ropes cut, chains snapped, silence broken. He thought of how far the ripples had spread from one morning, one act, one lock. He thought of how dignity, once a shield only he bore, now echoed in voices young and old. The world beyond. Maplewood still burned with injustice, still weighed heavy on his shoulders. But here, in this quiet corner, something had shifted. Not fixed, not finished, but shifted. And sometimes that was enough to start again. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the stars above, and whispered to the night, "The rope is gone, but I'm still here." And the silence for once felt like peace. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The lawns of Maplewood grew wild with color. Less uniform now, more human. The board no longer sent letters about flower pots or grass height. Children played in the cul-de-sac without the sting of disapproving eyes. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt lived in instead of patrolled. Marcus still rose early for shifts and returned late, his Jeep parked neatly in its place. But the Jeep no longer drew suspicion. It drew respect, even awe. People walked past it quietly, a reminder of the morning when silence broke and truth stepped forward. Karen's name was barely spoken anymore. When it was, it came with a wince, a shake of the head, a muttered, "Remember when she thought she owned us?" She had become history, not a neighbor. Her house was bought by a young couple who planted flowers of colors Karen would have banned. Nobody complained. The blossoms grew freely, defiantly. Devin visited Marcus almost daily now, his notebook filled with lines they discussed together. "You said silence can be a weapon," he told Marcus once. "But how do you know when to use it and when to speak?" Marcus thought for a long moment. Silence is strong when it protects dignity, but when silence protects lies, then it's poison. The difference is in what you're carrying. Devin wrote it down carefully, nodding. One Saturday, the community held a gathering not for crisis, not for apology, but for growth. They invited Marcus to speak. He resisted at first, claiming he wasn't a preacher, wasn't a politician. But they insisted. And finally, he stood before them, the cul-de-sac filled with chairs and lanterns. He looked out at the faces, neighbors who once turned away now leaning forward listening. Children fidgeted, parents hushed them. Phones were tucked away. No one wanted to record this. They wanted to hear it live. Marcus cleared his throat. His voice was steady. "You asked me to speak. I'm not here to lecture. I'm here to remind you. What happened wasn't just about a lock or a car or one woman's obsession. It was about what we all allowed. Silence gave her power. Silence kept her on that throne. And silence almost cost me my dignity. You've started to change. You've spoken when before you hid. You've looked each other in the eye when before you looked away. That's good, but don't stop. Because silence waits for the moment you get tired. And then it comes back. Carry dignity. Not just for yourself, but for the people standing beside you. Carry it when it's easy, and especially when it's not. That's the only way we don't repeat this." The crowd was silent, but it was a living silence, not the old dead kind. They absorbed his words. Some nodded, some wiped their eyes. Devin, sitting in the front row, looked up at him with wide, burning eyes. Marcus ended simply, his voice softer now. "That's all." The crowd applauded, not wild, not theatrical, but strong and steady. It carried more weight than cheers ever could. Afterward, neighbors came up, shaking his hand, thanking him again. He accepted with calm, offering only short lines in return. "Live it. Prove it. Don't forget." When the lanterns dimmed and people drifted back to their homes, Marcus stayed on his porch. The Jeep gleamed under the streetlight, quiet, unshaken. On the table beside him, the broken lock still lay, beside Karen's letter. He picked up the lock, turned it in his palm, then set it down gently. He didn't hate it. It had given him more than it had taken. Devin returned, shy but determined. He sat beside Marcus. "That was powerful," he whispered. Marcus chuckled softly. "Powerful is dangerous. Honest is better." Devin grinned. Then it was honest. They sat in silence, the night wrapping around them. Crickets hummed, Wind rustled trees. The neighborhood breathed easy. Finally, Devin asked, "Do you think she knows, wherever she is? Do you think she realizes she lost?" Marcus thought for a long time. She didn't just lose. She revealed herself. That's worse. Because now, everyone sees, and once people see, they can't unsee. Devin nodded, chewing on the thought. The night stretched, stars scattered across the sky. Marcus leaned back, eyes on the heavens. He remembered his father, remembered every word of warning, every scar of silence. He remembered the teacher who silenced him, the guard who followed him, the neighbor who doubted him. All those memories, pressed down, but they no longer suffocated. They shaped him. He turned to Devin, his voice soft but firm. "One day, they'll try to cut your lock. Maybe not with metal cutters, maybe with words, maybe with laws, maybe with silence. Don't let them. Carry your dignity like it's unbreakable, because it is." Devin's eyes shone. "I will." Marcus nodded. The night deepened. Houses went dark one by one. The cul-de-sac quieted. Marcus remained, his silhouette steady under the porch light. He spoke not to Devin, not to the neighborhood, but to himself, to the silence, to the history still pulsing beneath his skin. "I was told dignity could be taken. I was told silence was my cage. They were wrong. Dignity isn't theirs to take. Silence isn't theirs to use. They can cut every lock I own, but they can't touch what I carry." The words hung in the night, simple, final. He closed his eyes, breathed deep, and let the quiet settle. This time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't a weapon. It was peace. And in that peace, Marcus Reed carried what no one could ever cut.